Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm joined by Mark yet again. Hi Mark.
Hello, how's it going?
Good, I've had him kept in a cupboard to break in case of podcast.
Yeah, and I get fed, so it's all right, really. Can't complain.
So today we're going to be talking about Commandos, their various phases throughout the war and how you can tell the difference and how you can use them in bolt action. This is mostly going to be Mark talking here because I know some stuff, but he knows a lot more than me. I'll probably come into this a lot more when it comes to the modelling and the selectors side of it. I think the first thing to sort of talk about, though, Mark, is what is a commando and what's the difference between a sort of a modern one and a World War II one?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. In terms of the word, it's a South African word, and it's got its origins in terms of its modern usage in the Boer War. So, at the turn of the 20th century, when the British military was heavily involved in a pretty controversial conflict in South Africa, South African natives were forming irregular fighting units, which were carrying out guerrilla warfare tactics to oppose the British. And that's where the term comes from. We then jump ahead and we skip past World War II and jump ahead to the present day. And in the British military, a commando is almost, not quite, but almost interchangeable with a Royal Marine. Yeah. Because the commando role, which is ultimately an amphibious soldier, so a soldier specialised in amphibious combat, that role is owned by the Royal Marines.
Yes.
Now, the Royal Marines do other stuff than that. They are not just commandos, if you can put it that way. And likewise, there are other services that can do commando roles and can be qualified as commandos. So it's kind of not as simplistic as that. But in its modern term, if you were to go to the British military and say, who has the commando role, what is a commando? 9 times out of 10, you're talking about the Royal Marines.
Yeah.
And for a rank and file qualified Marine, they will qualify in the commando role with the commando shoulder flash and with the green beret, which comes with it.
Yeah.
But that being said, you can get Army commandos, Navy commandos, Air Force commandos as well, but that's it's a subspecialisation. It's not a core role.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, especially bolt action, that don't tend to know a lot about in depth about the modern military ways and the Second World War, they just automatically assume that World War II commandos are Royal Marine commandos because they know about modern Marine commandos and they just assume that they're exactly the same.
Yeah, it's an easy assumption to make. And whereas it was the British Army that started the commando organisation and laid down all the groundwork for it.
Yeah.
And the Marines only came 2 years later. So the British Army took on that commando role and instigated it in 1940, shortly after the Battle of France and the Dunkirk evacuation. And then the Marines started to get involved in 1942.
So,
sorry, after you.
Yeah. The how they all started, it pretty much stemmed from Churchill, didn't it?
Yeah, totally that. It was after, it was in June 1940. It was after the Dunkirk evacuation, and basically the top British brass were thinking of how do we wage war? We can't just be seen on the defensive now. The Battle of France was a disaster for the Allies. The British are very much on the defensive. There's no two ways about it. As successful as Operation Dynamo and the evacuation was, in the big picture, the whole thing's a disaster, and the British are trying to think of a way to look like the aggressors still, to look like they're taking the fight to the enemy.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas which comes out of it is the commando organisation. Which is basically to take the fight to the enemy shores and to organise raiding forces. So that's initially set up to be looking at the coast of France and Norway, and that's in the early war where it's all happening. And the idea is to take volunteers who are at exceptional levels of physical fitness, competence, experience, and independence. So, these are guys who can work very independently in small teams if need be, and to take the fight to the enemy.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So that's sort of it's a very British thing about sneaky units during the Second World War. I mean, the Commandos sort of started this thing, but you've got a lot of units like the SAS, the LRDG, the SOE. There's so many of these sneaky raiding units that it gives us that sort of very elite feel.
Yeah, they were an elite unit from the word go, and this isn't me sort of quoting doctrine, it's purely like a personal opinion, but I'd say that they were an elite unit, whereas the likes of the Long Range Desert Group and the SAS were a special force. And that there is a delineation between the two.
Yeah.
That you've got special forces who are in very small groups carrying out very special operations, whereas elite units can still carry out the battlefield role, and they also, particularly if you look at the commando operations in Norway between 40 and 42, that these were pretty sizable operations. This wasn't 20 or 30 guys in jeeps dashing through the desert to blow up German airfields. This was, a couple of hundred. This with significant support. So that's, I guess, where I'd put the delineation between the commandos were arguably never a special force. They're an elite force.
They're an elite frontline unit that's put into a traditional battle rather than a hit and run, harrying and guerrilla tactics.
Yeah, I mean, they were certainly capable of that, and there's plenty of times when they did carry out that role. But they were closer to the kind of conventional soldiering role than special forces were.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of the early raids there. Obviously, the we pulled back from Dunkirk. We're now at home, and we need that not easy win, but we need a win. We need to be seen to be taking the front foot. What were some of the early raids then?
Early raids-wise then, so it kicks off very quickly. It's only a matter of weeks since the whole concept has come out with, so the operation, the opportunity for training and getting these specialist units sorted out is pretty limited. But by the end of June 1940, there's already raids against the French coast.
Yeah.
Now, these aren't that successful to start with for all the reasons we've just mentioned. It's too quick. And also, they're not really banding around the commando term yet. They're called independent companies, which is something, for example, the Australians, they carry on using that term a lot longer than the British do.
Yeah.
After that, there is... The raids carry on in the Channel Islands, because remember, like Guernsey, for example, the Germans took quite quickly. So there's raids in Guernsey, there's raids across the Normandy coastline, and then in 1941 is when it really sort of starts to pick up its pace a little bit, when you start to see some of the larger things happening in Norway. If I get my pronunciation right, Lofoten Islands in Norway. But that's a pretty major operation in 41 for the Commandos, where they basically go in, destroy a lot of infrastructure, and when they extricate again, they bring over 200 German prisoners back with them. So that's when you're starting to see the success of this starting to ramp up, and Commandos starting to appear on the German radar a little bit more in terms of as a concern. And this is where also we're starting to move towards the notorious Commando Order, which comes a little bit later.
So, just a quick one on that. It's pretty horrendous. Basically, anyone doesn't know Hitler's Commando Order. It's that effectively anyone that isn't... It's very odd, really. It's like any special forces, raiding forces, anyone caught behind enemy lines, anything like that, even if they were in uniform... they were to be executed. Now, this goes directly against the Geneva Conventions, saying that a fighting man cannot be executed. They must be taken prisoner if they surrender or are taken prisoner. So it's pretty horrendous. I've also, my wife and I went to, I think it was Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And I was walking past they had like a cell block set up still. And they're walking down, and you look in each cell, and there's a picture of a person that was in that cell. And on one of them, I walked past it, and this room was full of poppies. And I thought, that's really bizarre. Poppies at a concentration camp. Because to a lot of people, if you don't know, especially our American listeners, the poppy is a very specific thing to... It's effectively it's more Commonwealth troops, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this room full of poppies and this picture, and it was a commando. And basically, this commando had got taken prisoner in 1942, and they shoved him in a concentration camp, and worked him to death.
And the origins of the Commando Order as well. It's nothing sort of cast iron proven really, but one of the main theories, kind of accepted by a lot of historians who dug into it, is that the Commando Order was a reprisal because on at least one of the early Commando raids, German prisoners were taken. They were taken back to the Commandos' landing craft and then realised we don't have the facilities to take these guys back to Britain. So therefore they were executed.
Got you.
So from the German point of view, if they then find out that these elite forces have been across, and then they find their friends who have been tied up, gagged, and then shot in the back of the head, then you can see why the Commandos are starting to get the reputation they do, and also the Ministry for Disinformation as well. The Germans at some point during the war get the idea or come up with the idea from somewhere that commandos are recruited from prisons. That they're not regular army soldiers. They're murderers and violent criminals who are basically given weapons and told, we're going to drop you off for limited periods in enemy territory. Go crazy. Go do what you want. Yeah. Which is obviously not remotely true, but a pretty terrifying rumour if that starts to...
So that's your early war raids. The Commandos are starting to get bigger and more well-known, obviously, but they're starting to get a lot more funding and the names change. So that mid-war period then, what are the significant changes?
Mid-war period, you're starting to move towards what's called the Special Service Brigades, I believe. I'm trying to wrap from the top of my head whether that was just for Normandy or was just before. I think it was just before. But you get into the point now whereas instead of being kind of carried out at what is the equivalent regular force at battalion level, things are getting bigger. And there's more support behind it. Commandos are becoming more of an international force. They're being used a lot more in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean as well. So there's more stuff going on in more theatres. Later on in the war, it even gets as far as kind of Burma, China, India theatre, and there's a lot more stuff going on there. But the Special Service Brigade, as and when that turns up, so they are the SS, and which isn't particularly popular with the Commandos because they are the British SS. And whilst from a post-war point of view, you can look at a lot of German forces, and we know a lot more about how the Germans organised their military now. Back then we didn't, but we still knew exactly who the SS were. So the Commandos objected quite a lot to being referred to as the SS, which is what they were re-rolled as.
Yeah. Okay. So we've sort of touched on that, the start of the Special Service Brigades. Touching back on what we said at the start with the Royal Marines. So when abouts did the Royal Marines become Royal Marines Commandos? Because that must have happened at some point. Because obviously Royal Marines have been around since wooden sailing ships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Royal Marines, their origins were as an army unit seconded to the Navy to basically to act as an amphibious force and for boarding actions and to defend Royal Navy ships. So Royal Marines have been around for literally centuries. Yeah. They fought through the First World War as well in what is like a conventional role in the First World War in the trenches of the Western Front. So we get to this point, and there's quite a big push in the Royal Marines to say this commando role is about amphibious assault. Amphibious assault is the territory of the Royal Marines, and we should be involved. So in 1942, the first Royal Marine Commandos, and again, it's confusing to what is a commando. A commando is an individual, but a commando is also an organisation. The whole organisation is the Commandos, but then again, the terminology is different. For example, they weren't using platoon; it was troop. So you have a troop of commandos, and then a commando itself I'm trying to remember off the top of my head if it's. I think it's the equivalent of a regiment, but I would have to go digging.
No,
I'm sure someone will pick me up in the comments.
Yeah.
So the first Royal Marine Commandos are set up in 42. One of the key differences, they're not all volunteers. Army Commandos were all volunteers, whereas the Marines, some of them were pressed into it. And so you start to get quite a lot of inter-service rivalry almost immediately, with the Army saying, you can't really call yourself elite when you're forcing people into this role. They're not even keen, they don't even want to do it. Whereas the Marines are turning around and saying, if you look at the Army's early war efforts, they described a lot of them as amateurish at best.
Yeah.
And said this is a role that should have been the Marines from the word go. So the two organisations are not necessarily seeing eye to eye, and you even see it in the TOE that they have different opinions on what is the composition of a troop.
Okay.
And which starts to lead into bolt action. And what we've done with the new rules, and that an Army Commando unit and a Marine Commando unit are organised differently.
Differently, yeah. Okay, so all this is building up and up and up and up. We've got commandos fighting all over the world, but the one big sort of the Allies' first real massive jump off into occupied Europe, I'm not talking about Italy here, but Normandy, the Commandos played quite a bit of a large part in the landings and the subsequent fighting.
Yeah, so Normandy was playing a huge part. It was, in terms of numbers of manpower alone, this is bigger than anything that they've been involved with before. And in Normandy, you see the use of the 1st Special Service Brigade and the 4th Special Service Brigade. So the 1st Special Service Brigade are around about Sword Beach, and the 4th are Gold and Juno, and also part of the main operation to link up with the American beaches as well. So, whereas the first waves across the board for all 5 beaches were specially trained and ready to take the brunt of the amphibious assault role, this was kind of always something the Commandos were intended to do anyway, but the difference here was how they were equipped and doctrinally how they were used. So instead of get in, quickly, fight, get out, and in a lot of cases do it as silently as possible, this is a case of get in, hit hard, take key objectives and hold them.
Yeah.
Instead of going in with, weapons that they used earlier, like the Delisle carbine, which I've never fired one, but I've had friends who have and said it's as close as you will ever get to a fully silenced weapon. All you can hear is the click of the hammer and the trigger. So weapons like that were being used before, whereas now you see things like the Vickers K coming in instead. So the Bren gun is still there in the light machine gun role, but the Vickers K, which was designed as an aircraft weapon, has a far higher rate of fire.
Yeah.
So it is about going in with maximum firepower and hitting and punching through the enemy line rather than that sort of pseudo-stealthy role.
Yeah. So, there you go. We're going to sort of briefly touch on the history. There's a bit of history for you about the Commandos. If you do want to know anything more about it, anything more specific, leave your questions in the comments below and we can come back to it in our next Q&A session. Or I can come back to you with a specific answer. Because these videos are quite short, we can't go too overboard on the history, but that's a really good overview of everything that happened during the war. What we'll move on to now is the models out there available in 28mm. Some of these, and I think this is what you were alluding to earlier before we started recording, is that if you want to be historically accurate, your Commando models need to look a certain way. Certain equipment wasn't used early war or late war, if you catch my drift. So you can't have a Commando looking a certain way in the early war or the late war. A few of those bits of equipment we can talk about when I bring up some of the models that you can get out there. I suppose we'll start with the Warlord Games stuff. So you can buy a plastic box of Warlord Commandos. Have you got any of these, Mark?
Yeah, that is when I first started playing bolt action. That is literally where I started. Was that box set was the first thing I ever got to kind of get into the hobby again. And I really like them. I like the plastic, kind of multi-pose thing of where you can set them up the way you want. They're very much late war.
Yeah.
I say that. Is that perhaps a little overly harsh? You could put some early war stuff together with them, actually, to be fair. But
so you're getting 25 models in there, so you've got enough there for a couple of squads, a command squad, and a special weapon. So monetarily wise, it's pretty good going.
Yeah, it's got you could get a Piat team out of it. Why you'd want to, obviously, is a complete other thing. But so Piats you can get, light mortars are in there, and even with the most mediocre of kind of conversion skills, you can easily get snipers and medics and that sort of stuff out of it quite happily.
It's a pretty good box. Variation. Like you said, I reckon probably mid to late war you could get away with easily.
Yeah, it's if you wanted to model some of the raiding forces and really get the flavour of that, I think you'd be pushing it. Yeah. But in terms of that heavy hitting stuff, you'll do. It covers the majority of it, the mid to late. I mean, one of the things which defines them is the actual weapons they carried. So, for example, you kind of often associate, particularly from old war movies, Commandos were just legging it around with all submachine guns.
Yeah,
that's not
Thompsons.
True. It was still, they had a high concentration of submachine guns allocated to them, but your average Commando was still a rifleman, first and foremost.
Yeah.
The submachine guns, the same as the standard British Army, started off with a Thompson being the favoured, but the Commandos held on to their Thompsons very possessively once the Sten started to get introduced, and it's only really around Normandy that the Sten is more commonly seen with Commando units because there's just not enough Thompsons to go around. I forget exactly what the costs were, but I think
£2. You could pay. It was £2 for a Sten gun Mark II, I think.
I mean, it was somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 Sten guns for the price of one Thompson.
Yeah, the difference is the jamming. I mean, I've got both. Viewers, if you look up here, that there is a Thompson on my shelf, and I've got a Sten gun in the back, and my Sten gun literally jams every few rounds. It'll jam, and I'm there cursing it and messy. But high concentration of SMGs. That's a big thing, especially for selectors. Other models wise, Other model wise, there's no other plastics out there. There's only Warlord that do them. But you've got the rest of them, I think. So you've got 2 sets really that are late war, late mid, and you've got 1 set that's very early. So I've painted up a bunch of Commandos. I'll stick a picture up now. These are early war ones. These are from Foundry. And as you can see, the key thing here is the cap comforter. So that's that little woolen hat thing they've all got on there. That's definitely a sign of early war, isn't it?
Yeah, early and mid-war, they were popular in the early raids and also in the Mediterranean and Aegean systems quite a lot.
Yeah.
The thought behind it being for these night raids where they want to be as silent as possible, having a metal helmet can just clank around a bit. It's just one less source of noise. So they use the cap comforters for the stealthy raids quite a lot. So if you were, for example, going for that classic D-Day Normandy look, obviously it's up to people and what they want to do, isn't it? You don't have to be 100% accurate, but if you are a slave to history, cap comforters should not be seen in Normandy, really. It was steel helmets.
And then...
But yeah, the cap...
Oh, sorry.
The plimsolls. Yeah.
Yes, the plimsolls. Go on, so they can wear PE shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The white plimsolls, which were issued for gym sessions, were also... I remember it from school. I remember them being really squeaky. But apparently they're a lot more silent than standard issue boots. So, raiding forces for the people who are pretty handy with converting the models. If you can stick them in gym plimsolls for raiding forces, that was also an accuracy.
And then the last sort of 2 I'll mention, you've got Dixon Miniatures and Artisan. Both got late war Commandos. Artisan I'm a big fan of. I love painting them. Nice chunky figures. The downside there is you're very limited on poses, and they're for the late war, and that's pretty much it. So that's the models squared away, what you can do. When it comes to armour support and that sort of stuff, you've got Churchill AVRE. It was the AVRE, wasn't it? And what's the Cromwell?
The Centaur was the
Centaur.
main. This was a Royal Marine armoured group thing at Normandy. So this was a very specific, very limited time only. But if you're modelling a Normandy force and you want to have that Royal Marine support, it was a whole load of cast-off Centaur tanks, which had the howitzer, I believe, instead of the standard gun, and they also had the bow machine gun removed as well. But they had a funky paint job. They had those cool numbers painted all around the turret. Which looked awesome.
Yeah, that's quite cool. So that's the models pretty much squared away. Well, touch briefly now before the end on selectors. So originally, the only real selector you've got is the Raiders out of the Armies of Great Britain. It's not great. It's a bit meh. So you've written
in a low point skip. I think it'd be all right.
You've got a couple of units of Commandos, more Commandos, and then one of each. And it has to be veteran. To be honest with you, you can do that in a standard reinforced platoon. There's no difference there, so it's a bit meh. However, you've remedied that, so we've got two selectors. One selector and then a handful of selectors we can talk about a little bit. So the first one is the 4-7 Commando list, which is available on the Warlord website. It's a PDF. You wrote that one a while back, didn't you?
Yeah, that was going back a few years now. The 4-7 Commando list was like the first thing I ever did for bolt action. That was when the guys at Warlord, I got in touch because I'd done work with other areas and said it's something I'd like to be involved in. They said come up with something, so I gave them that, and it went down quite well. And then I got the official stamp. That was based on 4-7 Royal Marine Commando on D-Day, so it was a really, really kind of focused in specific list.
Yeah.
From the feedback I've had from it, people seem to like it. I don't think it's broken. I don't think it's sort of unbalanced.
It's fun. It is fun.
Yeah.
I've played against it a couple of tournaments, and it's not broken. It's just a lot of fun. That, however, will be replaced. Would you say replaced?
Yeah.
Replaced by some of the work that we've been doing on. We won't say too much of this because the book isn't released yet. However, there is Commando content in the upcoming British and Canadian sector Normandy book.
Yeah, which 2 hours before recording this, we got the email through from Warlord, which is pretty much the final opportunity for us to put corrections in. So this book is very, very, very close to being ready for release. Stands fast for world events, which are delaying everything. There's a British and Inter-Allied Commandos list. The Inter-Allied Commandos is referring to number 10 Commando, which was bringing in all kinds of different nations, started by the French, I think off the top of my head, who wanted to be part of this Commando movement. So there is opportunities for you to do that as a player. But it's a whole load of new units. A lot of them are just very simple. If you want to take a flamethrower, a Piat, whatever it might be, you have to be veteran, and you're now paying the extra point per model to have the two Commando special rules.
Yeah.
So some of them are very, very simple port crosses, but some of them not so much. Some of them are quite different.
Yeah.
So there's a whole load of new units in there, and then the selectors. As well as just covering the Anglo-Canadian beaches, it's covering a lot more of the war. So we've got the early war raiders, we've got the mid-war Mediterranean and Aegean, the late war selector. Its support options allows you to kind of take a Normandy list or a Burma list, so you can tailor it to which part of the war you wanted to. Which part of the world you wanted to. And there's also a support option as well. Which is a kind of for behind the rifle troops.
Yeah.
This is talking about your machine gun and mortar support. So to take one of those instead.
So it's very in depth. It's going to replace a couple of those bit more boring theatre selectors and a lot of new units. If you are interested in Commandos, collecting Commando armies, this book is going to be perfect for you. Definitely recommend getting it. It should be a lot of fun to play with as well. I've looked at it a bit, and I'm sort of, because I've got Commandos, I'm eyeing up one of the early selectors just to have a bit of a few games with.
Yeah, that was definitely the aspiration. Was I kind of figured if people use Commandos and want to play Commandos, if I could have a one-stop shop of the Armies of Great Britain book's been out for a while. It laid the foundations down. It was really good. I've got no complaints at all with that. I think it did it in a really, really good way. But the game has evolved over years in a huge way. So the 4-7 Commando list seemed to be a stepping stone, and it's been a stepping stone to this, which is just if you wanted one book on Commandos, this is it. That was the plan, and hopefully we've hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. Well, right, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for joining me today. If you've got any questions at all, reference Commandos or anything we've said, drop them in the comments below and we'll get back to you, or get in contact on Facebook and let me know. Thank you very much, Mark, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you very much.